Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamualaikum, and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Studies Circle, HISC Seerah session 194, is it? 193. And we're continuing with the Battle of Tabuk after a few-week hiatus over the summer holidays, inshallah. So back to term time now, so inshallah we'll get up to speed and do it again regularly over the next few months, inshallah, until we get to the next major events. After the Battle of Tabuk, we'll do the story of Ka'b ibn Malik, and then there's the year of delegations, and then the Hajjat al-Wada, and then there's obviously the final days of the Prophet ﷺ. So still quite a lot to do in the Seerah. So we're in the 9th year of Hijri, and just a very brief recap of what we've done so far. So this is our fourth little session on the Battle of Tabuk, and the Battle of Tabuk has another name, which is the Jaysh al-Usrah, which is known as the Army of Great Difficulty. And we'll talk about that this week and next week, inshallah. But we started off with the beginning of the 9th year of the Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ, he was living aside from his wives. He took some time off from his wives, and there's lots of rumors around that, and related to that incident was there's somebody sort of burst into Umar ibn al-Khattab's house and to pass on the news, and then he said, are the army of the Romans attacking us? And because there was the growing threat from and rumors that the Romans and the Byzantium Empire had teamed up with some of the Christian tribes in northern Arabia into Syria, some of the Ghassanid tribes, and they were going to launch an attack on the Muslims. So the Muslims were quite on edge because of that. And then we also talked about how Abu Amir al-Rahib, who was one of the elders of the people of Yathrib before the Prophet got there, who was very upset, him and Abdullah ibn Ubay al-Sulaym, who were the leader of the hypocrites. They survived the Battle of Muadh, which killed off all of their peers, all of the chiefs and the noblemen of Medina. Apart from these 2 or 3 people, they perished in that battle, and that's because and that left the younger generation in Medina or Yathrib at the time looking for different political support and a different setup, and that's why and one of the reasons why they approached the Prophet and gave him bay'ah. But Abu Amir al-Rahib, he was upset that the Prophet had come and taken over Medina, and so he fled Medina initially to Mecca, and then he ended up with the Romans. Whereas one of his chums, Abdullah ibn Ubay, he stayed in Medina, and he thought he could try to undermine the Prophet ﷺ and became the leader of the hypocrites. But Abu Amir, he wrote a letter to Abdullah ibn Ubay to basically say, I need a secret forward base from which to foment insurrection and sedition and undermine the Prophet ﷺ. And he'd raised some funds for it, and they hatched a plan where they would build a mosque, so trying to operate in plain sight. So they built this mosque, which was very near, within walking distance of Masjid al-Quba. And as the Prophet ﷺ is trying to raise money for the war effort, the hypocrites aren't donating towards the war effort, they're donating to build their mosque. And then this mosque, which Allah calls in the Qur'an Masjid al-Dirar, the mosque of harm or distress. Allah reveals as the Prophet ﷺ is returning from the Battle of Tabuk that this is actually a mosque of harm. And before the Prophet ﷺ actually went out, the leaders of the hypocrites basically wanted him to consecrate the mosque, to give its blessing, and to pray in the mosque. And the Prophet ﷺ, partly because he knew who these people were, he just basically said, look, I'm just on my way, we're about to travel, we're about to go on this expedition, I'll sort it out later on, inshallah. And again, when he's coming back, he gets told of the plots of Abu Amir al-Rahib, and he sends some of the Sahabi to burn down that mosque, which, as I say, the hypocrites were using as a base to undermine Islam. Anyway, so news spreads that there's about 40,000 troops, Roman troops from Heraclius, alongside some of the other Christian tribes gathering up north. So the Prophet ﷺ, he announces a counter-offensive, and unlike many of his other expeditions, he tells the people well in advance where they're going. He tells them the destination where they're going and who they're going to fight. Because oftentimes the Prophet ﷺ would not tell them, or he would do redirection and give the impression that they're going in one direction, or interested in marching in this way, but then he'd go that way, to have the element of surprise. But here he's telling the people, because it's going to be a long, arduous journey in the middle of summer, in the heat, and people need to make provisions because it's a long march. He's telling them up front where they're going. And they're going to fight the Romans, so they need to be psychologically prepared for a proper battle with a real paid army. So it says that the Muslims, they gathered about 20,000, between 20 and 30,000. But it was in the middle of summer, it was harvest time, when the people of Medina harvest their dates. So obviously there was a lot of people who were umming and ahhing about it. And obviously this was a good excuse for the hypocrites to use to not go. And then we in the second session, we talked about the fundraising of the Prophet ﷺ, because war is extremely expensive. It was then, and it is now still extremely expensive endeavor. And so the Prophet ﷺ needed to raise funds on a colossal scale, and that's what he would do. Every time he'd be in the mosque, he'd be asking for people to donate, and sort of even the women of Medina would donate their jewelry for the war effort. But the hypocrites would try to use any excuse not to go and not to pay funds, and they often made flimsy excuses. And we talked about how some of them said, well, there's one famous hypocrite who basically said, if I please excuse me, I don't want to go, because if I see the women of the Romans, I'll just lose my mind, and I'll go berserk. So therefore, I don't want to go. So the Prophet, he probably knew he was, just making it up, but he let him, have his way and not go. And we'll talk about some of the benefits of that when you want to take with you people who want to go, and Allah refers to this in the Qur'an in Surah Al-Tawbah. Inshallah, we'll do that in a few weeks' time. And then as they're fundraising, the Muslims are competing with each other to do good deeds. And we talked about how Umar ibn al-Khattab, he thought, well, this is my occasion to outdo Abu Bakr. This is him, he's internalizing this. Abu Bakr is always at the front, and he's always getting the best, and he's always getting the closest to the Prophet ﷺ and getting the highest deeds. Let me use this occasion to outdo him in terms of reward. So he goes home and gathers up half his wealth and gives to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet says, well, this is a lot of money. What are you going to do about your family? And Umar bin al-Khattab says, look, I've given you half my wealth and half is for my family. And the Prophet accepted that. And Abu Bakr came shortly after that and gave him, a lot of wealth. And the Prophet says, how much is, what are you going to do for your family? And Abu Bakr says, well, I've left for them Allah and His Rasul. So Abu Bakr had given essentially all of his wealth for the war effort. And then at that point in time, as I say, this is Umar internalizing this discussion. He said, after that point in time, I knew I would never again compete with Abu Bakr or try to surpass him, because there's no way I can outdo him. And this is Umar bin al-Khattab. He's relaying this story after Abu Bakr has passed away, and he is the Khalif, just to try to elevate the status of Abu Bakr even more in the eyes of people. So again, it's just a lovely story. And then we talked about the story of Uthman ibn Affan, who before the armies, when the Prophet first says, he wants to raise funds, then he announces he'll donate 100 camels and another 100 and another 100, and then as the army is getting ready, Uthman's caravan arrives, and he sells everything, and he has over 1,000 gold dirhams, and he places that in the Prophet's lap. In the Prophet's, he's sort of rubbing his hands through the gold coins, and he says, after today, whatever Umar does, he will be forgiven. He's guaranteed Jannah because of his generosity. And then there's some other big donors like Abdurrahman ibn Auf, who came to Medina with nothing, literally, and now has become quite a rich person through his astute business dealings. And also talked about, there was one other person, Abu Musa al-Ashri, who is from one of the lower sort of tribes, as it were, who had nothing. He came to the Prophet and asked, can I have some camels to come along? And the Prophet was in a bad mood because he'd been listening to excuse after excuse after excuse from the hypocrites. And the Prophet says, Wallahi, I don't have anything to give to you, go away. And so Abu Musa, he goes back to his people, and they're quite upset. How come you come back empty-handed? But then later on, when somebody donated something and the Prophet managed to buy some camels, he then sent a couple of these camels to Abu Musa. And then we finished off one of the stories about al-Wathila bin Ibn al-Aqsa, who was one of those few people, there were a handful of people who begged Sahabi to take them with them, but they were unable to. And he was basically saying, if I gather any war booty, I will give away all of my share to whoever takes me along. And basically saying, all I want to do is go and fight, and if I get any war booty, I'm not going to keep it for myself, I'll give it to whoever takes me. And then there's an old man who takes him with him, and then they come back, they have a bit of war booty, a few camels, and when they're back in Medina, this chap al-Wathila, he takes these camels and he gives them to this chap and says, look, this is what I promised you, here are your camels. And the chap says, look, they're not my camels, they're your camels. I only said that so I could bring you along to keep you happy. Keep what is yours. So again, it just shows the sincerity of some of these people. And then in the last session a few months ago, we talked about how the army is leaving. They finally made all the preparations and they're leaving for Tabuk. And the Prophet, he appoints Muhammad bin Maslama as the political governor over Medina. So he's sort of holding the political reins and the administration and making sure things happen. Because obviously you can't leave the whole city unprotected, undefended, ungoverned. So again, the Prophet needs to leave a structure there to protect the city and to keep it governing, because they're going to be gone for a month or two. And then he appoints Ali ibn Abi Talib as the person to look after the Prophet's family and their affairs. But the hypocrites, they're making fun of Ali and saying, look, the Prophet is not taking you because you're going to be heavy, you're not a good fighter, you're a coward. And this really gets to Ali, so much so that when the army is actually leaving or left, Ali puts on his armor and he rides out to the Prophet and begs him to take him and say, look, listen to what these people are saying about me, I can't take it. And the Prophet, he tries to calm him down and says, look, I've left you in charge of my affairs, right? Aren't you happy that you will be to me like Harun was to Musa? Basically, look, we're saying we're essentially like brothers, and I'm leaving you to look after my family. Such an honor, right? He's not saying I'm leaving you to be the person in charge after me, or I'm not leaving you to be politically in charge of Medina. You're looking after my family of Ahl Bayt. Again, and the reason I'm mentioning that is obviously because some other people, they use this incident as a way of trying to say that Ali ibn Abi Talib should rightly have been the first Khalif after the Prophet died, partly because of this incident. But anyway, and so there was a few other people who were a bit sort of laggardly in their response, and we'll talk about Ka'b ibn Malik at the end of the battle when they return, because a lot of things happen when they return. But there's a couple of others. There's Abu Khaythama, who procrastinated, and he then delayed, and then the process of he left, and then Abu Khaythama, he's going back and he's sort of enters into his gardens, and his wives has done some sort of laid out the carpets and some fruit and some drinks and water and stuff, and then he realizes, he just has an epiphany and says, oh my gosh, what am I doing here when the Prophet is marching in the heat, right? And he just packs his things and he just leaves, and then catches up with the Prophet who's pleased to see him, but says basically, you got here by the skin of your teeth. If you delayed any more, that would have been very serious for you. And then likewise, Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, he had a problem with his his camel. Either it wasn't keeping up, and it said that he basically jumped off his camel and he sort of killed the camel because it wasn't functioning well. And then he took his own backpack and he's walking all the way and meets up with the army. The Prophet is glad to see him and makes a prophecy that he walks alone, he will die alone. And that's what happened many years later. And we talked about that and how he got buried by a group of Sahabi and travellers. And then we finished off with mentioning these people, the Baqa'un, who were people who were so poor they could not afford to go, and neither were they able to be given anything, donated any camels or anything like that to go along with the Prophet, and they were genuinely crying, even though they are excused to not go because of their poverty. They were desperate to go, just like al-Wathila we talked about. And the Prophet mentioned to the Sahabi when they're on the journey that these people in Medina, they will receive the exact same reward as the army that's marching. And again, that just shows the importance of niyyah. So moving then on to the Battle of Tabuk again, despite all the fundraising, they're not perfectly equipped. They're ill-equipped. They haven't got enough provisions. They run out of food, and they run out of water, and things get very desperate for them. They have to share 7 or 8 per camel, and it's said that and it's a few weeks' journey, that members of the army at times had to eat the leaves of the trees in order just to feel as if they're eating something, but then those leaves would cause their lips to get swollen, but they would still eat it, and this is how desperate they would be. And then others were so desperate that they even slaughtered their camels, despite the fact that the camels are so dear and expensive, and important for the journey. They're just so desperate they slaughtered their camels in order to have food, and some would even take the camel hump, which has sort of the remnants of the water in it, and they would try and squeeze out what's contained in that to quench their thirst. So again, this is part of the reason why it's called the army of distress, because there wasn't any actual fighting, that there wasn't any sort of combat between the army and the Romans. So it's known as the army of distress. But on a few occasions, the Prophet ﷺ was implored by the Muslims, especially Abu Bakr, to do something about the water, because the army is really suffering, and this is the heat of the summer. So the Prophet ﷺ, he would make dua, and then sometimes rain would come, or sometimes they'd see some water, and then he would facilitate a miracle, and we'll talk about that in a second. One of the incidents on the way is the army passed by al-Hijr, and this is the native land of the people of Thamud. And we did the story of the people of Thamud many, many years ago. And when we did the Qisas al-Anbiya, the stories of the prophets, rather. And the people of Thamud, they were big, large, proud people who lived in these rock faces. And the prophet that was sent to them was Saleh. And obviously, if you can remember, that Saleh, he made, through Allah's permission, a huge camel appear from inside a rock. And that was his miracle. There was a huge piece of rock, and from inside that, a huge camel came. And it was a living, breathing, proper camel. And it was a huge camel. And because the people asked for a miracle, and the test for the people was, they are not allowed to drink the water on alternate days, because that's the days when the camel drinks the water. So they've got a big water well. On certain days, only the camel can drink that water. So they have to do their sort of water calibrations around that. But then some people, they didn't like that, and they hamstrung the camel, and they killed the camel, and then Allah obviously destroyed them. But as they're passing that land, the Prophet ﷺ said, don't drink for that water, and he forbade the people from using that water to do wudu either. And some people had gathered some of the water from the well to make some bread, and the Prophet ﷺ said, do not eat the bread, but you can feed your camels with that bread. It's Ibn Umar, he said that upon passing the place of al-Hijr, the Prophet ﷺ, do not enter the houses of those who erred themselves, lest what happened to them would afflict you. But if you had to do such a thing, then let it be associated with weeping. Essentially, basically saying is, like, they've got the ruins of where the people where the people lived, and basically don't go into those and go, wow, what a wonderful place. And it's sort of giving us an indication of when we're visiting these places, especially those people that have been punished by Allah, don't go there in amazement at the achievements of these people, but go visit these places as a reminder of Allah, and be sad for what happened, and use that as a way to improve it. And obviously, what some of the scholars say nowadays is basically, like, for example, when people go and they marvel at the things that Pharaoh was able to create, Ramesses, the second or whatever, so much that the people, in Egypt actually call their children after some of the pharaohs. So basically saying, don't be so skewed in your mentality that you forget about the real moral behind the story. So it's not doing tourism for the sake of tourism. You do tourism for a purpose, and if that brings you closer to Allah, then that is important. Don't do it, to be proud of the achievements of people who were rebellious against Allah. So that's an important thing that we can learn and take forward. On another occasion, there's another story, because there's a lot of little stories about the journey to Tabuk and back. One is that the Prophet ﷺ said that he told the people as they're camping, tonight there's going to be a severe wind that's going to blow, so nobody should stand up, and whoever has a camel, tie up your camel really tightly. And then a strong wind blew, whether it's a tornado or something like that, we don't know, but a strong wind blew, and then one of the men, he actually stood up, and it said that he got carried away in the wind and he ended up on a mountain far away. And it's also mentioned that during the whole journey, the Prophet ﷺ would combine the salah, the prayer of noon and the afternoon, and the sunset and evening prayers, Maghrib. So Dhuhr, Asr combined, and Maghrib, Isha combined. So that's what he did. And then another couple of stories will finish, and these are related to Muadh ibn Jabal. And Muadh, again, he's a very famous Sahabi. He's a young Sahabi. And he narrated a lot of Hadith as well. But there's a couple of lovely stories about Muadh on this journey. One of the stories is that Muadh he narrates this in the first person. It says basically, when the Prophet ﷺ went out towards Tabuk, after he had prayed Fajr with all the people on the way, the people went back onto their camels, and then the sun began to rise, and the people began to fall asleep as they're on their camels, and so the people would stray, and he says that he himself was sleeping on the camel. His camel tripped, so he sort of jerked up because his camel tripped, and then when he jerked his camel reins, it went up, and then as it got up and came down, it scared the camel of the Prophet ﷺ, who was also sort of wandering in front of him, and then the Prophet ﷺ's camel also jerked forward and bolted. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he calmed his camel down, and then he turned around to see who'd done that. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's wearing a turban and he's covered his face. So he uncovers his face, sees it's Muadh, and then he says to Muadh, Ya Muadh, O Muadh, calls out to him. So Muadh, he says, Labayka ya Rasulullah, here I am, O Rasulullah. So the Prophet ﷺ says, come here. So Muadh says, I came towards the Prophet ﷺ. I came so close to him that our saddles were touching one another. And then the Prophet ﷺ turns to Muadh and said, look, I didn't realize, the people became so separated from each other, and we're going off in different directions. So Muadh says, well, the people became sleepy, and then the camels went in their own way, and he's sort of, just trying to sort of calm over the situation. And the Prophet says, look, I didn't realize that people are so far away. Ya Rasulullah, they fell asleep because they were tired. And the Prophet then said, look, I was also tired. Which is, happened to me as well. So then Muadh was thinking, look, when because I'm so close to the Prophet ﷺ, and there's nobody around except the two of us, and our saddles are so close together, this is my opportunity. I can ask him something. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, can you give me permission to ask you something? And I just, love this little story. It's almost like your elevator pitch. If you think about, if you meet up with someone that you look up to or admire, If you had, if you had 5 minutes with them, what would you talk about? And again, it may be, I've been to a couple of dinners where the chief of the organization, he's on my dinner table. So I need to think, what can I say to him? Do I make an impression? Do I get him to notice me? What would I say? What questions would I ask? Likewise, certainly when I was your age, or a couple of years older than you guys, there would be these, sheikhs or shayukh who would come, from, all over the world, or and you'd spend some time with them, and then you sort of think, well, if I'm alone with them, what will I ask? Or you hang around with some really knowledgeable people, and you might find yourself in that situation, and then you need to think, well, what are the things I would ask this person, or how can I use this interaction to make me a better person? So again, think about these things for yourselves, just in terms of, how, if you were in that situation, what would you ask? And here's Muadh. He's with the Prophet. He's one-on-one with the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, how wonderful is that? So he's asking, can I ask you a question? He's not just blurting it out. He said, look, can I ask you a question? So the Prophet ﷺ says, ask whatever you feel. So he goes, give me permission to ask you a question which has caused me to think and ponder until I've become sick. There's something that's really stressing me out. Can I ask you that question? Well, says, yeah, ask whatever you want. So Muadh says, Ya Rasulullah, tell me, what can I do to enter Jannah? Something that only you can tell me. That's a lovely question. So, tell me what I can do, but only, this, I can't, I don't want a generic answer from anyone else. I want you to tell me what I can do to get into Jannah. And the Prophet says, wow, this is, what a great question. He goes, wow, fantastic, right? And he repeats it 3 times. And he goes, you have asked a great question. And again, he's picking up, wow, this is a fantastic question. What a great question. And then he repeats 3 times again, and it is an easy thing if Allah wants good from you. And it's an easy thing if Allah wants good. And it's an easy thing. So again, for emphasis, and we know this from the Seerah, and we talked about this before, for emphasis, the Prophet ﷺ would repeat something important 3 times because that grabs your attention. So then the Prophet ﷺ says to Mu'adh, this is the answer. He goes, believe in Allah and in the last day, and offer your salah, your prayers, and worship Allah alone. And if you do this until you die upon this, that's it. That's all you need to do. Believe in Allah, the last day, pray, worship Allah alone, and do this until the day you die. And so then Mu'adh says, Ya Rasulullah, because this is his sort of one-on-one, private, quality time. And he goes, can you please repeat that for me? And the Prophet ﷺ repeated it. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, fine. He knows he's got his attention. He goes, okay. And this is a really famous hadith, and I've used this many times, the hadith of Mu'adh. And he goes, the Prophet ﷺ says, right, what if I was to inform you about the head of the matter, the backbone of the matter, and the crown or the peak of the matter? And I think this might be and I know we've done this in Nawawi's 40 Hadith. We've mentioned this. Because what if I was to inform you about the head of the matter, the backbone, and the peak of the matter? So I mean, he's basically saying, the head, the most important thing, the backbone, the pillar, the sort of the thing that props it up, and the peak, the crown, the jewel on top. So Muadh says, yes, of course, may my mother and my father be sacrificed, may my mother and father be ransomed for you. And this was just a way, a polite way in which they say, yeah, of course, it gives respect to the other person. And it's one thing that the Sahaba used to do. So the Prophet said, right, the head of this, the head of all of this is the shahada. The most important thing is the shahada, bearing witness that there is no one worthy of worship except Allah, and the Prophet ﷺ is the messenger of Allah. Right? That's the head of the matter. That is the most important thing. The backbone is the salah, the prayer, and giving zakah. So the head is the shahada. The backbone is the salah and zakah. Right? That's what molds you into a Muslim. And the peak, or the crown jewels, the peak of the matter is jihad fi sabilillah. So if you want to be right at the top and foremost, it's jihad fi sabilillah, jihad for the sake of Allah purely. And again, they are walking or riding into battle, and he's telling them that, look, this is the head, the backbone, and the peak is jihad fi sabilillah. Right? And then he goes again. This is often quoted and often misquoted. And I've been commanded to do qital, fighting and killing, qital, of the people until they establish salah, give zakah, and testify shahada. And if they do that, their lives and their properties are protected in the rights of Allah. Yeah? So it's a really famous hadith. And again, the word the Prophet uses is qital, which is often used only in the context, in Sharia terms, only in the context of fighting on the battlefield, right? So it's not a metaphorical fight. It's an actual fight. But this is not a general command where it's the Muslims have to fight everyone forever and all times. It's the permission to fight. And again, you look at the history of Islam, how it was spread. They took this into account. The Muslims weren't in perpetual war with everyone all the time. They had boundaries to their territories, but they weren't fixed boundaries. And they would expand and they would have treaties, but it wasn't unlimited, unqualified war in every direction. And the process then continues, and he said, I swear by the one in whose hand is my soul, no face becomes tired, no foot becomes dusty in any deed that will raise it higher in Jannah after the fard salah, like jihad fi sabilillah. So the fard salah, obviously the most important of your actions, but the thing which can surpass that is striving genuinely in jihad fi sabilillah. No face becomes tired, no foot becomes dusty, in any deed that will raise it higher in Jannah, like jihad fi sabilillah. And then he finishes off, nothing makes the scales heavier than spending money on an animal that is in the way of Allah, or carrying people in the way of Allah. So again, funding the war effort, that is the best way in which you can spend your money. It's more, has a greater return of investment than any other spending. Your return on investment in jihad fi sabilillah outstrips any other charity or any other spending that you do. Very famous hadith of Muadh. I'll quickly finish off with another quick hadith of Muadh, then a couple of minutes here. So Muadh says that we went on the expedition with the Prophet ﷺ in the year of Tabuk, and we used to combine our prayers, and then until we came close to where we're going to be. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, tomorrow you shall arrive at the spring of Tabuk, and then you shall arrive there in the hot time of day. Make sure no one touches the water until I get there. So a general command to the whole 30,000 in the army, 30,000. We're going to get to Tabuk tomorrow. It'll be in the middle of the day. When you get to the water, don't touch the water until I get there. So he said his command. Then Mu'adh says, so when we arrived there was a small sliver of water, just a tiny sliver of water. It's not a big river, it's not a big well, just a bit of water. And essentially the well had dried up. So when we got there, we saw that 2 men from our camp had already arrived there, and they were, using the water. Because obviously it's that heat of the day, they're all thirsty and they run out of water already. And these 2, they couldn't control themselves. So the Prophet, he galloped towards them and says, have you touched the water? And they says, yes. And so the Prophet, he became angry at them. And I love this bit in the way the people record things. The Prophet became angry and he said what Allah wanted him to say. So the Prophet obviously told them off very harshly. And this is the Prophet of Allah telling them off. But we don't know what he said. The way the people recorded it is that he said what Allah wanted him to say. But obviously he was angry. So Mu'adh, that's part of the etiquette, that you want to just cover up those things, but getting across the point. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he commanded the Sahabi to then gather round. They all gathered in one place, and then Mu'adh says he washed his hands and his face in that little bit of water, and then the water started gushing out until all of the army, 20,000-30,000 of them, drank from that water. And again, this is one of the miracles by Allah's permission, that the water multiplied and it became a source, that spring became, a great source for the army. And again, they're going to camp there for 20 days. So this water will outlast that huge army. And think about how much water 20,000 army would get through, and their animals. Then there's another hadith related to this incident where, I think it's in Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet says, "O Mu'adh, it's only going to be a matter of time, if you live long enough, that this very land will become a land of greenery." So at the moment, it's parched desert with a little bit of water. And the Prophet was turning to Mu'adh and says, look, it's only a matter of time, this will become lush green, right? At that point in time, nobody lived there. It was a barren land, and that's partly why the army camped there, because there was nothing there. But later on, Mu'adh said, when we reached there, the spring gushed out forth. We found too many had already preceded us, and the Prophet asked him if he drunk it, and he says, yes. And then he said what Allah inspired him to say. Then he scooped a little bit of the water of the spring, the thin stream, and gathered us around. He washed his face and his hands and poured it back into it, and consequently plenty of water sprouted out, so much so that the people were watered. And then he said, Mu'adh, if you were doomed to live long enough, you will see here fields full of vegetation. And then again, it's a prediction, and it came true. Obviously, people then, because of the spring as well, people knew the Prophet had camped there, and then you got Muslims encamping there, and this is sort of became one of the stops on the trade route. And then later on, when the Uthmani Khilafah, they built the railroad from Istanbul to Medina, they used this as one of the major train stations, Tabuk. And so now it's a very prosperous place. And again, that's what the Prophet predicted to Mu'adh, inshallah. So we'll finish there. So Jazakallah khair, thank you for listening. Do remember us in your dua, do remember the ummah in your duas. And Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَلَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Inshallah, next time we'll talk more about what they did when they were camped in Tabuk. There's not much that goes on, and then the return journey, and then we'll get on to, inshallah, the story of Ka'b ibn Malik. Assalamu alaikum.